I was sitting in my cramped little office, scrolling through emails and half listening to the hum of the city outside when my phone buzzed. Another case assignment. The name popped up on the screen. Malcolm Carter, 17 years old. Charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest. I sighed and leaned back, rubbing my temple. Another black kid caught up in the system. Another young life on the line. By the time I got to the holding cell at the county jail, Malcolm was sitting on a metal bench, his head in his hands. His left eye was swollen shut, and his lip was busted. I stopped at the bars and cleared my throat. "Malcolm," he looked up, cautious. "I'm Jason Wright, your public defender." He studied me for a moment, then exhaled. "You the first person to actually listen to me?" His voice was hoarse, raw. "I'm here now, so let's start from the top." According to the police report, Officer Daniel McAllister had responded to a call about a stolen car in a gas station parking lot. When he arrived, he found Malcolm inside the vehicle, supposedly attempting to hotwire it. McAllister claimed Malcolm got aggressive, resisted arrest, and reached for his waistband, forcing him to use necessary force to subdue him. But Malcolm's version was different. "I wasn't stealing no car, man," he said, shaking his head. "I was waiting for my cousin. He ran inside to grab some stuff. Next thing I know, that cop rolls up, gun already out, telling me to get out the car." "You followed his orders?" I asked. "Yeah, man." I put my hands up, did everything he said. But he grabbed me anyway, slammed me on the ground, started yelling about a screwdriver in the car, said it was evidence. "But that ain't mine." Malcolm stopped, his hands curling into fists. "He planted that, man." I didn't react. I'd heard stories like this before, too many times. "Did anyone see what happened?" I asked. "There were people around, but they ain't say nothing. Scared, I guess." He looked away, jaw clenched. "And now they got me on resisting?" "Man, I didn't do nothing." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "We're gonna figure this out." Malcolm gave a bitter laugh. "Yeah, all right." I knew that look, he'd already given up. Later that night, I sat in my office, replaying everything in my head. Something about this didn't sit right. If Malcolm had really been resisting, where was the evidence? No surveillance footage had been included in the discovery. No witnesses were listed in the report. Then I saw it. One line buried deep in the evidence list. Bodycam footage available upon request. McAllister's bodycam. I picked up the phone and dialed the DA's office. "This is Jason Wright, public defender for Malcolm Carter. I need access to Officer McAllister's bodycam footage." A pause. Then a dry voice responded. "That'll take some time." "How much time?" "We'll get back to you." They hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone. I had a bad feeling about this. And I was right. I knew what "that'll take some time" really meant. They were stalling, hoping I'd get frustrated and move on. But I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I went straight to the DA's office in person. The receptionist barely glanced up as I walked in. "I need the bodycam footage for the Malcolm Carter case," I said, my voice calm but firm. She tapped on her keyboard. "That request is still processing." "Processing?" I folded my arms. "Bodycam footage isn't a special order. You either have it or you don't." She gave me that bland, bureaucratic smile. "I'll let the prosecutor know you followed up." I exhaled slowly, keeping my temper in check. "Do that." By the time they finally sent the file, 3 days had passed. When I opened the email, I wasn't surprised to see the timestamp. Late Friday afternoon. Classic move. Send it at the end of the workweek, hoping I wouldn't look at it until Monday. I wasn't waiting. I locked my office door, plugged in my headphones, and hit play. The footage started with shaky movement as Officer McAllister stepped out of his squad car. The gas station came into view, neon lights flickering overhead. A black sedan sat parked near the entrance. Malcolm was inside, just sitting there. No screwdriver in his hands. No signs of forced entry. McAllister approached the car, hand already on his gun. "Step out of the vehicle," he barked. Malcolm raised his hands immediately, his face confused. "What's going on?" I said, Step out of the vehicle. Malcolm moved slowly, cautiously opening the door. He kept his hands visible, but McAllister yanked him out anyway, shoving him against the car. Spread your legs. Man, I ain't even done nothin'. McAllister kicked Malcolm's legs apart and wrenched his arms behind his back. Malcolm didn't resist. He barely had time to react before McAllister slammed him onto the pavement. Then came the worst part. McAllister stepped away, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a screwdriver. He crouched near the open car door, looked around once, then casually tossed the tool onto the seat. I paused the video. My pulse pounded in my ears. There it was. Proof. I sat back, breathing deeply. I'd seen dirty cops before, but something about watching it happen in real time, watching the ease with which McAllister planted evidence, the way he moved like it was just another day, made my stomach turn. I could already hear the excuses they'd throw at me. The footage is unclear. Maybe the screwdriver was already there. Maybe the camera didn't capture the whole scene. I wasn't naive. The system didn't care about what was right. It cared about what it could get away with. But now I had something they couldn't ignore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Malcolm's mother. Mrs. Carter? It's Jason Wright. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense. Did you find something? Yes, I said. And we're taking this to court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row, murmuring among themselves, their cameras aimed at the bench like vultures waiting for a kill. Malcolm sat beside me in his too big suit, his knee bouncing under the table. His mother clutched his arm, whispering a silent prayer. At the prosecution's table, Assistant District Attorney Robert Langley flipped through his notes, like he already knew the ending to the story. He had that smug, easy confidence, the kind that came from winning cases without having to try too hard. And presiding over it all was Judge Henry Calloway, old, white, and infamous. He was the kind of judge defense attorneys warned you about, the kind who believed cops were heroes by default and that every black kid who stood before him was guilty of something, whether or not it was the crime they were actually charged with. I took a slow breath. I knew what I was walking into, but I wasn't backing down. Mr. Wright, your motion? Calloway asked, barely glancing at me. I stood. Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges against my client on the grounds of police misconduct. The arresting officer, Daniel McAllister, planted evidence on my client and used excessive force. I have body cam footage proving it. Langley sighed like he was already bored. Objection, Your Honor. This is speculation. No, it isn't, I shot back. I have the footage right here. I walked to the evidence cart and loaded up the clip. The screen flickered to life, showing McAllister's approach, Malcolm's immediate compliance, the violent takedown. Then the screwdriver. Langley shifted in his seat, but Calloway? He didn't even blink. When the footage ended, I turned to the judge. That screwdriver wasn't in the car when Officer McAllister arrived. He planted it, then used it to justify an arrest. That's not law enforcement. That's entrapment. Silence. Then Calloway leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Mr. Wright, while this footage is concerning, it's not conclusive. I froze. Not conclusive? The video does not explicitly show when the screwdriver entered the vehicle, Calloway said. It could have already been there. You saw him throw it onto the seat. My voice rose, but I forced myself to stay calm. Malcolm's prints weren't even on it. That was never his tool. Langley stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, even if we set aside the screwdriver, the defendant still resisted arrest. Officer McAllister reported that he did not resist, I interrupted. That's another lie. The footage clearly shows that Malcolm followed every order given to him. Calloway sighed, like this was all just a nuisance. At best, the video raises questions, but it does not meet the burden required to dismiss the case. Motion denied. I clenched my jaw. Motion denied. Just like that. After court, I stormed out of the building, my hands balled into fists. Malcolm and his mother followed close behind. That's it, Mrs. Carter demanded. He just ignores the truth, and we're supposed to accept it? No, I said, my voice tight. We are not accepting this. Malcolm exhaled sharply. So what now? I didn't answer right away. The wheels were already turning in my head. They wanted to bury this. Pretend it never happened. Fine. I'd make sure the whole damn country saw it. I sat in my office, the glow from my laptop casting long shadows across the desk. The body cam footage played on a loop in the corner of my screen. The same infuriating sequence over and over. McAllister tossing the screwdriver onto the seat like it was nothing. Like framing a kid for a crime he didn't commit was just another routine part of the job. Judge Calloway wanted to pretend this evidence was inconclusive. The DA wanted to sweep it under the rug. They thought I'd let this go. They were wrong. I copied the footage onto a flash drive and pulled up an email draft. The subject line was simple. The evidence they don't want you to see. The recipient list? A hand-picked selection of reporters, activists, and legal watchdogs. The kind of people who wouldn't just let this sit. I hesitated for half a second before clicking send. There was no going back now. By the next morning, it was everywhere. The video had gone viral overnight. News stations played it on repeat. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags calling for justice, for McAllister's firing, for Calloway's removal from the bench. People weren't just angry. They were furious. And now the system couldn't ignore it. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone rang. I saw the name and felt a grim satisfaction. Langley. I answered. Morning, counselor. Something on your mind? A deep sigh. What the hell did you do, right? I did your job for you, I said. Since you and Calloway didn't seem too interested in justice, I figured I'd let the public weigh in. You leaked confidential evidence, he snapped. You know that, right? I released public evidence that your office was trying to bury. You think this is going to make things easier for your client? Langley growled. You think judges are going to do you favors after this stunt? I don't need favors, I said. I need justice, and so does Malcolm. A long pause. Then, through gritted teeth, this case isn't going away now. Good, I said. Now do the right thing. I hung up before he could say anything else. That afternoon, Judge Calloway made a rare televised statement. He looked pale, uncomfortable. Behind him, the court's press liaison fidgeted nervously. We take allegations of misconduct very seriously, Calloway said, his voice measured. Given recent developments, I have decided to reopen the case for further review. I smirked. They could pretend this was voluntary, but I knew the truth. The pressure was working. The courthouse was a different place now. The first time we walked in, Malcolm was just another black kid the system had already decided was guilty. Now, the air was thick with tension. The halls packed with reporters, cameras flashing, protesters chanting outside. Everyone was watching. Judge Calloway sat stiffly on the bench, his face drawn tight. The man looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But public outrage had dragged him back into this mess. I adjusted my tie and stood. Your Honor, the defense renews its motion to dismiss all charges against Malcolm Carter, on the grounds that the evidence against him was fabricated by Officer McAllister. Calloway exhaled through his nose. Mr. Langley? Langley's usual smugness was gone. He shuffled his papers, cleared his throat. Given the new public scrutiny of this case, the prosecution does not oppose the motion to dismiss. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Malcolm sat up straighter beside me, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Calloway didn't look happy, but he nodded. Very well. The charges against Malcolm Carter are dismissed. Mr. Carter, you are free to go. Mrs. Carter let out a choked sob. Malcolm blinked, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. I squeezed his shoulder. It's over, I whispered, but I wasn't done. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, given the evidence of misconduct, the defense formally requests an independent investigation into Officer McAllister's actions. Calloway's jaw clenched. That is outside the scope of this hearing, Mr. Wright. Respectfully, Your Honor, it isn't. This court was nearly used to facilitate an unjust conviction. That deserves more than a quiet dismissal. More murmurs from the crowd. Calloway shifted uncomfortably. He knew the whole country was watching. After a long pause, he nodded. The matter will be referred for further investigation. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep the pressure on. McAllister wasn't walking away from this. Not this time. Officer Daniel McAllister was placed on administrative leave the next day. A week later, he was fired. A month after that, he was indicted for falsifying police reports, evidence tampering, and excessive use of force. By the time his trial started, the entire country knew his name, and not the way cops usually wanted. I was in my office, flipping through case files when Malcolm walked in. He looked different, lighter, free. "You still working?" he asked, smirking. I chuckled. Justice doesn't rest. He sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands. I wanted to say thanks. For believing me. For fighting when nobody else would. I leaned forward. "I didn't do this alone, Malcolm. The truth was always on your side. We just had to make sure the world saw it." He nodded, his expression serious. "A lot of people don't get that chance." I knew that too well. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything still settling. Then Malcolm stood, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I'm gonna do something with this," he said. "I don't know what yet, but I can't just pretend it didn't happen." I smiled. "Good. The world needs more people willing to fight." As he walked out, I exhaled, running a hand over my face. The truth had won this time, but I knew the system wasn't done. There would be another Malcolm, another cop like McAllister, another judge like Calloway trying to turn a blind eye. And when that time came, I'd be ready. If the story resonated with you, share it with those who need to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter and that will lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we are capable of when we stand up for what is right.